Hello, and welcome to our next presentation. On behalf of the MIT CDOIQ Virtual Symposium, we'd like to thank all of our sponsors who have continued to support the symposium during this very challenging year. Before we thank our partners, we'd like to ask that sometime during the symposium's breaks that you visit our partners' virtual booths. You can also visit the Content Hub on the MIT CDOIQ website for some great partner resources. We'd like to thank the following partners: Deloitte, Informatica, Privacy Analytics, CDOIQ, Fusion Alliance, KPMG, Sandal Consultants, Tamer, Elation, Ali Data, Big ID, Boomi, Caserta, Citizen, Data Kitchen, Garage, Wakira, Pylog, Click, ThoughtSpot, Eckerson, Global IDs, Snowflake, Starburst. And as I said, please make every effort to visit our partners, use the virtual passport, because without them and our partner support, the symposium could not be held. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome from a small town in Texas. My name is Mark Ramsey, and on our session today, we're going to explore the similarities between the movie, the 1960s spaghetti Western movie, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and the journey that many of us go on in implementing a large-scale data program. Now, many times people have heard of the idiom, sort of the good, the bad, and the ugly. In most cases, it's a quick review of sort of what went well, what could have used some improvements, and then what didn't go well at all. In this case, I think it makes sense for us to actually dig a little deeper and explore how the plot of the movie actually has a lot of similarities to the implementation of a large-scale data and analytics solution. So first of all, let's talk a little bit about the movie for those of you who may not be familiar with it. First of all, The Good and the Bad and the Ugly, which you'll see on the screen, I have the Italian version of the name, and it's referred to as a spaghetti Western. And I have to be honest with you, that's not a term of endearment. In the 1960s, in addition to Hollywood filming movies in the Western United States, folks in Italy were actually filming and producing movies that were referred to by Hollywood as spaghetti Westerns. And so Clint Eastwood and the other characters of the movie actually traveled to Italy, and the scenes that you see in the movie, and I'm going to be sharing some of the photographs from the actual movie, those are not in the Western US. Those are landscapes of Italy. And when the movie was first released, it did not really do well at the box office. But over the years, it actually has really gained critical acclaim as one of the best, if not the best, Westerns ever filmed. So let's explore a little more about the movie plot, just so that you can get a chance to understand that. When I first started, that was the actual theme song from the movie The Good and the Bad and the Ugly. So if you were wondering, you may have heard that song before. That is actually the theme song from the movie. Now, the movie itself is based on three main characters. And it's really about their journey to find hidden gold in a very tough climate around the Civil War. So the first character, the Good, this is actually the character played by Clint Eastwood. And the Good character is a calm and forgiving man. And he actually knows the name of the cemetery where the treasure is buried. The second character, the Bad, this is a very different person. He's a fast-tempered, greedy man, but he actually knows the name of the grave in the cemetery where the treasure is buried. And then the third character, the Ugly, This man is a cold-blooded killer. He doesn't know anything about the details of where things are. He simply wants to go after the gold, and he's going to go after it in his own way. So with that little bit as a backdrop, let's explore how that plot aligns to our data journey. So, again, if you think about it, when we are focused on implementing a data strategy and trying to implement large-scale data programs within organizations, it's very similar to the plot of the movie that I described. We don't really know where the buried treasure is within the organization because the data could be hidden in a variety of places. It could be locked away in operational structured sources. It could be locked away in external sources that are coming from other organizations. And it also could be hidden in unstructured data that is relatively new for how organizations look at their overall data landscape. Now, in addition to that concept of hidden resources or hidden treasures, in most of the data journeys, we also have three main characters. We have a chief data officer, we have a chief information officer, and then we usually have a business executive. That could be someone like the head of R&D for a pharmaceutical company, could be the chief marketing officer. In some cases, it could be the chief executive officer. But there's usually those three main characters, the CDO, the CIO, and a business executive. Now, it's usually up to the CDO to bridge that gap between the technology and the business. Because in many cases, the business or the business executive may know the name of the data or the type of data that they're interested in using to really answer some very important questions, but they don't understand where that data is located throughout the organization. Now, on the other hand, we have a chief information officer, and in many cases, the CIO is the person that really knows where information is stored, or at least within their organization, they should know where the data is stored, but sometimes that's a challenge. And like I said, it's the CDO that really bridges that gap. When I was the chief data officer for a large pharmaceutical company, the CIO at that organization was very focused on optimizing the operational applications in the organization. So there were hundreds, let's say 500 applications within the organization. And the goal of the CIO was to do reduction of that to simplify the application landscape within the organization. He was so focused on that there was a challenge where the data landscape, so really where all of the hidden treasure was for the organization, had bloomed into hundreds and hundreds and thousands of data sources. So in effect, the data landscape became much like the Wild West, where different folks were doing different things with the data. It wasn't as controlled. There were people going in different directions, and there wasn't that really control over the actual inventory of the data. So that's an example where you can have different and competing objectives that really make it difficult to find the hidden treasure in the organization. Now, the next thing I'd like to do is spend a few minutes walking through the good, the bad, and the ugly when I kind of step back and look at a number of data programs across different industries. And there are some repeating themes of if there is a successful outcome, a good outcome for a data program, what are some of the characteristics? And I'm going to put those in the good category. And then there are cases where there are some challenges and some pitfalls, if you will, to avoid. And I'm going to put those in the bad category. And in the ugly category, I'm going to talk about when you're doing a data program, what are the things that you have to overcome, and they could be extremely challenging to the success of the overall program. So first, let's start with the positive. So the good. So when you look at successful data programs, first of all, it's these organizations focus on the entire data landscape. So rather than just picking a narrow slice, the organizations look across the entire data landscape and really try to tackle the complexities for all aspects. So that's internal data, external data, and unstructured data. Many times we see organizations that are too narrowly focused in the breadth of the data that is really involved. And what ends up happening is that they may be successful in the short term, but this is where you've heard that it's very difficult to scale a program, or they can't move it into full production. It works in a POC, but it doesn't work at scale. And many of the reasons for that stem from a very narrow focus on the data that's involved in the solution. Second, which is, if you kind of think of data as sort of the bottoms up part of the equation, the top down part of the equation is around use cases. And I think many folks have heard the concept of a use case, but just to be sure, it really is what question the business is trying to answer. So how is the data going to be used? What question will be answered? And what will be the value to the organization by answering that question? That is really a use case. And so in some organizations, the use case could be around acquiring new customers. In the pharmaceutical industry, it could be how to better design a clinical trial, or it could be how to select a target for a new medicine. So those could be examples of use cases. And one of the challenges is, again, starting with a very narrow focus on use cases. We've seen many times where folks will have a single use case and they will design and build the solution specifically to that use case, which means then the data that is required to answer the questions is very narrow. And once they implement that first use case, the plan is to scale the use case to many others. The challenge is that by not architecting the solution to really handle multiple data sources and multiple use cases, it's very rare to see things scale. So instead of starting small and growing, what typically happens is the organizations, they start small and unfortunately they stay small. So the really good programs are ones that tackle a wide perspective of the data as well as a portfolio of use cases. My suggestion would be, if you don't start with at least a dozen use cases, and if you're not really designing the solution to handle about a dozen use cases across the organization, then you run the risk of painting yourself into the corner and not being able to grow the solution over time. The third aspect or characteristic that we see on successful or good programs is really focusing data analytics on the source data to really drive out the understanding, the quality, and the rationalization. So this is where we see folks applying machine learning to data sources to rationalize and curate those data sources, use automation for the inventorying and the ingestion and the profiling of the data, and eliminating as much manual intervention as possible. So it's really automate and accelerate in this area. And so this is really around a modern data management ecosystem. So don't use the techniques that were created, 3 decades ago to try to solve the problems of today. It's a matter of using analytics on the data to drive out that rationalization. And that's a third characteristic of a good program. And then kind of an extension to that, like I mentioned, is automating the inventory, the ingestion, and the rationalization. So again, use automation, use analytics on the data itself to help drive this out. And then I think one of the things that sometimes we overlook is the deliverables, right? So it's very important to make sure that deliverables are achieved in that 3 to 6. 6 is really on the out end. I'm working with a client now where the team we're working with, we are planning to deliver the first release in about a 6-month window, and that will be probably 25% of the total solution from a standing start to that first iteration in less than 6 months. But it gets all of the foundation in place, it gets all of the connectivity in place, and then it allows us to grow from there. So it's really around picking the landscape, picking the use cases, and then setting frequent deliverables in the 3 to 6 month time frame. So those are characteristics that we tend to see with good solutions and good data programs. On the bad side, I'm going to just call out a few things. One of the things that we typically might hear in a data program that ultimately has challenges is something in the effect of, well, we've already purchased this tool and we've used this tool for the last 10 years. And we have a lot of the folks within the organization that are familiar with this tool. And so we want to keep using this tool for all of the data programs that we do because it's a sunk cost. We don't have to buy or license a new technology. We'll just use the technology that we already have. That is normally a precursor to having a very challenging outcome on the program. And a lot of it is around that technology now and approaches to solving these problems now are very, very different than they were when a lot of these initial tools were developed. So using a technology that was first created 30 years ago, even though it has a long history and has been used with thousands of clients, it doesn't mean that it gives you the same results in today's environment. And a primary driver for that is the type of data and the sourcing of the data has changed significantly in the last 5 years. So unless something has been developed in the last 5, maximum 10 years, it really is solving problems that existed many years ago, but it struggles with solving the challenges that we have today. A good example is on external data sources. External data sources are not data that we control internally, so it makes it extremely difficult to leverage technologies that were designed to have more of a map and move kind of an approach. So that's a simple example, but it's one that's relevant. I think the second area where we see a number of challenges is really around trying to manually address things like data quality, access control, definitions, things that you would typically put in the data governance category. We see organizations that are still trying to put in place physical roles like a data steward or a data owner, and those folks build teams of people that manually try to catalog data, organize data, create rules for that data, and even curate that data. And again, frankly, that's not a scalable model. It may work in a situation where you have 50 or 100 attributes, but we're dealing with scale where there's tens of millions of attributes and the data changes on an ongoing basis. And so really putting in place a manual approach. So this is sort of the antithesis of the automate everything. There are still organizations that are trying to tackle some of these challenges by using a manual approach. And quite frankly, it is one of the big challenges that we see in this area. So please avoid trying to tackle massively increasing data volumes and complexity with a manual process. Another example of cases where we see challenges is around hand picking a small amount of data to solve a single case. And even if it's considered, I'm sure folks have heard the phrase low-hanging fruit. So even if it's considered low-hanging fruit where you can drive value for the organization in a short time frame, please avoid very limited, even if you call them POCs, the challenge is that POC trying to take that into a production environment, it's very rare that those succeed. What usually happens is that it stays a POC or it creates yet again another fragmented system that adds to the complexity of the data landscape versus really solving it or improving it, which is what the original intent was. And then finally, another bad characteristic are cases where people pick, like in today's world, a lot of times folks say, we're going to build everything on the cloud. Or folks say, no, we're building everything on-prem. Actually, today, it is not a good thing to pick a cloud solution and build it as a native cloud deployment because it locks you in to that single cloud deployment. Just like building an on-prem will lock you into that on-prem solution. So with the flexibility that is available today, really focus on hybrid multi-cloud. So being able to work on things that are within your data center as well as within a cloud, within multiple clouds. and giving you that ultimate flexibility to pick and choose how you move that information, how you move that workload based on the demands. So really, it is not good if you build something that's cloud native or limited, which is really what this point is meant to flush out. Is make sure that you do the reverse, which is you build something that's hybrid multi-cloud, so that you, as the business owner and as the chief data officer, can make the decision and have the flexibility as you continue to progress through the process. Now, I'm sure you're all anxiously awaiting. We've talked about the good, we've talked about the bad, and now we're going to talk about the ugly. So the ugly here, unfortunately for us in this profession, the data is ugly. And this is given the years that we have mistreated the data, given the years that we have made some short-sighted decisions on how to capture data, how to store data, how to really organize the data, the limited investment that we've made in having very solid lineage information about the data. Even though the data is key to the success, it still is an ugly part of this program. So just make sure that when you are developing a data program within your organization, that you recognize that the data will be ugly today, and unfortunately, the data will be ugly tomorrow. And you have to plan for incorporating information that will consistently vary, have challenges, have to be curated, have to be rationalized, and will be ever changing. That is part of the demand of building these types of solutions. So as you go into this program, what I would I'd really encourage you to not get into the belief that you can organize the data, make it structured, make it organized, make it clean, and then develop your data program. Because unfortunately, you'll never get to end of job. So you have to go into the program and really, as you're implementing the data strategy within your organization, recognize that dealing with ugly data is just part of the effort. The second is, don't assume that there's an inventory of even where data is located across the organization. So if you think about it, in any of your organizations, is it possible to quickly find out where is every piece of one type of data across the entire organization? Now, before you answer, let me clarify this a little bit. What I don't mean is that you can search and identify a claim number or a customer name, and that you can find that in a collection of relational databases. That may be possible. Most organizations can't do that. But what I'm talking about is if you need to find out every occurrence of Mark Ramsey in every single location of data across your organization, can you do that today? And for most organizations, the answer is a resounding no. You may be doing it with some of the structured data where maybe if my name exists as a customer in your customer relationship management system, or if my name exists within another part of your kind of structured data, chances are that's probably about 50-50 that you can access that. But what I'm talking about is, has my name appeared in PowerPoint presentations? Is my name referenced in team sites? Has data about me been extracted and put into an Excel file somewhere located in the organization? Is there a file that's stored in a file share in the organization that has that information? And the answer to that, like I said, is in most cases a no. However, if you think about the entire data landscape, that's really what we have to be focused on. And it isn't to find my name in the organization, it's to find those hidden treasures in the organization that happen to be locked away in a PDF file that's located in a file share somewhere in the organization. It's a report that someone has written that is stored in a document management system. And in some cases, it is structured data that is captured throughout the organization. But having a very deep understanding of that inventory is extremely important. And like I mentioned earlier, that can only be achieved through automation, of dynamically looking across the organization and inventorying and profiling all of the data assets across the organization. Which then also, the other ugly is the lineage, like I mentioned earlier. And then finally, really the breadth and the depth of the overall data landscape is something that most organizations really do not have a good handle on. Again, because I'm not referring to just Oracle databases or SQL Server databases or even document management systems. What I'm referring to is the entire data landscape, the entire collection of potential assets that you have in the organization. So it's extremely important that these four ugly facts of creating a data strategy for the organization, that you specifically have a plan of attack of addressing these on an ongoing basis, because these will not change and you can't fix them once and move on. These are things that are constantly evolving, constantly changing, and will have a very ugly impact on the potential outcome of your program. Now, if we jump back to the movie, and here's a photo. I said I was going to share a photo or two of the movie. This is a photo of the hills of Italy. And the piece here is, just like the movie, there was a standoff in the movie, and you can see the three main characters here. But we also have to avoid having a data standoff during the implementation of a large-scale data and analytics program. And in this case, you can see that we have the CIO, we have our business executive, and we have the CDO. And it could be a situation where there's a lockup, where you can't progress with the program because of either political battles between the different components or inaction between the components. Maybe the business has decided to delegate the data and the data quality and the ownership of data to the CIO, and the CIO has prioritized that down as something that's not as important as some of the other things. The CIO may try to block the data program in favor of really implementing a next generation ERP or a system upgrade of a core system. And in some cases, let's face it, we as CDOs, for a variety of reasons, we may have a stronger focus on defending the data and really looking at other characteristics or protections more so than actually driving the value of the data. So in this particular case, what I found to be the most successful in preventing a data standoff is making sure that the initiative around data and the use of analytics is a key strategic initiative of the organization. It isn't just a program, let's clean up our data and things will be better. It is actually a strategic initiative that is reviewed by the board of the organization, discussed by the CEO and the other chief executives, and is really being viewed as something that's going to have a substantial impact on the organization. Otherwise, if it's relegated to just be a project, this is where you can run into the situation of a data standoff, or worse yet, a failed program. And I mentioned this earlier, but I wanted to spend a little bit more time talking about why are we seeing such a demand for data and different data than we have in the past. And I think fundamentally, the rapid expansion of AI and machine learning is driving the need for broader and deeper data sources. So if you think about it, in the past, if we were doing customer segmentation or we were doing a predictive model, we could use maybe 20 or 50 or 100 data sources. We could analyze those, do a predictive model on those data sources, and it would help to understand who's the next best action. What's the next best action for someone that's a current customer? What's the next potential client that we could interact with? Those are things that happened, over the last 15, 20 years. In today's world, with the advent of deep learning and machine learning, we need vast resources to understand what is happening within the organization. So this really drives the need for new data sources that are coming from locations that we've never dealt with in the past, to give us that data that can feed a machine learning algorithm. We're also looking at more complex sources because we're now looking at structured and unstructured. We're looking at semi-structured. We're looking at video and audio and image files. So the data sources are much more complicated, much larger, more difficult to handle. That is also being driven by AI and machine learning. I also think that we're seeing a significant increase in the use of external data. And this is across all industries. If I happen to talk about the pharmaceutical industry, one of the things that I learned that was quite unique is that in the pharmaceutical industry, probably about 80% of the data that is used for analysis actually comes from external resources. It's not internally produced. So that means that 20% is internal, 80% is external. But when you put the two pieces together, that is really the competitive advantage of an individual pharmaceutical company. So you have to get it right on both the internal and the external to really drive out differentiated value. And then again, just like the movie, using AI and machine learning, we're trying to find that valuable data, that treasure in hidden locations. So in a lot of cases, data can come from places that you wouldn't normally expect. If for those of you who watch one of the earlier sessions from the weather.com team, they were talking about weather data. And weather data is something that has really started to gain traction in the last probably 5 to 7 years. And many organizations are now using weather data to increase their quality of forecasting. Weather data is a good example where if you back up 10 or 15 years ago, it would not have been considered a data source. Today, many organizations use weather as a data source. The question for all of us as CDOs is, what is that next hidden external data source that we can capitalize on today that will be the weather data of tomorrow? So that's something to keep an eye out for and think about, because there's many, many external data sources out there that could be the hidden data to help solve your particular challenges within the organization. And then finally, obviously the movie is a lot about buried treasure. You know, the three characters go through this very tough battle during Civil War, tough times, and there's struggles and diversity and all these different things. And ultimately they do get to the cemetery, they do find the gold. And then I'm not going to spoil the end of how it actually plays out, but they do find the gold. And so I thought it was important to really talk about, you know, from a little bit from my perspective on, you know, what are things to think about as that buried treasure, as you're going after that hidden treasure. I think one is to keep in mind that the decisions that are made on the data, and that's what really drives the return. That's what really drives the value. It's not the process, right? So don't get too hung up on the process. It's something that's extremely important, but you really have to keep a focus on providing the data and the analytics that can answer the question that will make a huge difference for the organization. You can evolve the process over time, but it's really about the data and the analytics. That's what drives the real value. And unfortunately for chief data officers, the data is not the value. The decision made by the business and the actions that they take, that's the value. So it's critical that we have a key business executive involved in the process and making sure that those decisions translate into value for the organization. Second is really help the organization focus on decisions that are transformational, you know, big decisions, not incremental value. I talk to a lot of organizations and they are excited about their data strategy programs or their data programs around, gosh, if we implement this, we could see a 5 to 10% cost reduction or a 10 to 12% revenue increase. And that's good, that's great. However, that is not transformational. You're aiming too low. Organizations, to really justify going through this battle, going through this tough journey, you have to focus on things that will make a 50, 75, 100% impact. You know, changing the organization, completely changing and creating a new business out of the data and the decisions that are being provided. So make sure that in the use cases, there are transformational impacts, not just incremental value. And finally, this will be this is a little bit of a yardstick to know if you're getting close. And that is, if you don't encounter significant organizational pushback and significant politics in the organization, that is an assurance that you're not going hard enough. You're not being aggressive enough. People need to feel extreme discomfort and feel like the organization is changing out from under them for this really to be an impactful program. So if you're on the mark and you understand the decisions that will drive huge value, you're focusing on decisions that are transformational, you will encounter pushback in the organization of, wait a minute, this is the way we've done this, we can't change, this is completely outside of the norm. If you don't feel that pushback, then you're not being aggressive enough to really tackle the challenges in the organization. So with that, hopefully this has given you a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek or a little bit of excitement. I even got my outfit here with the cowboy hat and the bolo, and wanting to be the part. I obviously don't look like Clint Eastwood, but this thought it'd be fun to talk about, because I do think, in all honesty, there's a lot of similarities to the challenges of implementing a large-scale data program to the plot and the characteristics of the good, the bad, the ugly. So with that, if you haven't already, at the Slido, you can enter questions, and those questions will come in, and we'll be able to kind of walk through those. And let's see. Okay, so one question is, do we also need to consider the role of the Chief Privacy Officer in this standoff? Yeah, I mean, you can fill in the gaps, and maybe in your organization, your CIO is in lockstep with the data program, and then maybe there's a Chief Privacy Officer, Chief Information Security Officer, other roles in the organization that are introducing potential challenges, pushback, and things that could cause delay in the implementation of the data program. So don't take it to mean that it's specifically those three. It's just that you want to prevent the standoff. And there's normally cases where there's different parts of the organization that certainly have different opinions. And sometimes inaction is as much of a standoff as actually proactive pushback on the implementation. Next question is, as in a true spaghetti Western, how we could manage the 2020 year as an outlier, just not consider 2020 year in our future algorithms for any behavioral analytics? Good question. I guess the challenge, of course, is that, the last time that we had a pandemic in the world was almost or a little over 100 years ago. So I think there's some, whether to disregard 2020, I don't think that's the real proper answer. And one of the reasons for that is that with the pandemic, I think we're actually going to see a lot of new normals. So I think, if anything, what we're seeing in 2020 as we progress through the year and how organizations respond, how consumers respond, I think what we'll see is the beginning of a new normal. So instead of 2020 being a complete outlier, I actually think 2020 may be a good example of how some change that will be persistent will actually impact the world after 2020. So and again, right now, it's all speculation, but I think it's important for us to learn from 2020 and how consumer behavior and how financial markets have behaved and what that actually is doing to a lot of the algorithms. But then at the same time, recognize that some things may revert back to the way they were. But we all are actually, I think, also going to see a new normal. So we don't want to be too hung up on throwing out 2020 too quickly. Everyone wants to use clean data, do analytics, draw conclusions, find treasure, but don't do the hard work to assure the data is clean. Right, suggestions. 100% agree. So, and the way I always describe this is, people talk about analytics or AI and machine learning, and AI and machine learning is great, but it's icing on the cake. And in order to really deliver, you have to have the cake. So you need to bake the cake before you can have the icing. And the hard work around the data platform is baking the cake. And people tend to forget that when they're talking about how great data and analytics can be for an organization. So the only thing I would kind of highlight in your question is, what is the definition of clean data? And what clean data is, in my perspective, is it's the data that represents the actions of the business and allows us to interconnect with larger repositories of data. So clean is going to be more accurate. It's going to be, it doesn't mean that it's completely standardized to a particular external standard. It can be. And really the suggestion there is to leverage machine learning technology and profiling and using analytics on the data to actually drive that out. And so from the experiences that I've had, there's a couple of products. One is the Tamer product. I think Michael Stonebreaker is going to be chatting I'm pretty sure he's chatting later in the event around really using machine learning to automate the rationalization of data. Tamer has done some great work on taking disparate data sources and standardizing those to an industry standard. Modak has a product called Naboo that does the same thing, where it's different because it's actually doing that inventorying process. So it's automated to go find the data across the organization, inventory it, ingest it, profile it, and really allow you to then use it as a raw material. So regardless of how you tackle it, use technology, use analytics on the data as part of that process. So if you're not applying AI and machine learning and advanced analytics to data in order to get it ready, then that's one of those cases where you're kind of missing the boat a little bit. And so the good category, modern data manager, is spending as much time investing in using data analytics on the data to prepare it as it is using data analytics in order to deliver the value for the business. One question is sharing examples of significant organizational pushback. Yeah, I mean, what I would characterize as significant organizational pushback is, let's say, for example, you're going to be implementing a completely new way to do a sales selection, and you're transforming, and given that it's going to require fewer folks in the field sales organization, but you're going to quadruple your results of your sales. And the VP of sales is pushing back, saying, no, we can't do that because we need to do it the way we have, and we know better. In the pharmaceutical industry, it could be saying, well, wait a minute, we still need to do the same number of physical experiments that we did 20 years ago. We can't use machine learning and analytics to accelerate the process. So, push back on the business of saying, look, we can't change because this is the way we've always done it. And basically them digging their heels in, and it really requiring an escalation in the organization to get that change to happen. So when I'm talking about really making sure that you're seeing that pushback, it means that if the CEO or the head of an entire organization is not directly involved in participating to remove some roadblocks, you're probably not aiming high enough. How do you see the role of the data warehouse going forward? Are they here to stay or obsolete? I think the role of the data warehouse, the traditional data warehouse is not going to stay. It's obsolete. Folks should not be building a traditional data warehouse where you map data into a structured relational source and load it and then run structured queries against that. The technology today is literally you can build a data warehouse. In fact, right before the call here, I was building a data warehouse. And it took me about 35 minutes to stand up the data warehouse and make it available. It auto scales based on the queries that come in. So it's a virtual data warehouse to make the data look like what the consumer would like to see it. But if you're currently building or you're wanting to expand a traditional data warehouse where you map the attributes, you ETL the data over, you load it, and you have tools against it, that is definitely obsolete because it puts too many constraints. You can't move fast enough. You can't answer questions fast enough. You really need to have the data in a more flexible format and then make it look like a data warehouse if that's the type of analysis that the end consumers need to do. Speak more about using technology to auto catalog and curate the data. Yeah, I mean, I would encourage you to look at modac.com, the Nabu product. It's something that I've used a number of times. It automates the inventorying of data. So it actually crawls the data sources, it inventories that data, puts it into a central repository, keeps the central repository current, provides profiling of all the attributes, loads all of those attributes into the data lake, all in an automated fashion. So that's really what I would characterize as best in class for a modern data environment, is completely automating the inventory and the orchestration of the load of the data into your data environment. Do you initiate any data literacy program? How long does it take for the organization to mature their understanding? Yeah, data literacy, I mean, one of the things that I've seen, I mean, people talk about data literacy. There's a very strong connection between data literacy and having a robust catalog of every attribute, every schema, every piece of data you have in the organization, and the connections between those things. So for me, data literacy is driven by the way you can search and explore and understand that underlying data environment. And unfortunately, most organizations don't have that. Many organizations have implemented a data catalog, but unfortunately, they've done it by manually curating and loading metadata in on very specific sources. So if you have 1,000 data sources, most data catalogs, I've seen implement maybe a handful of those. They're the most frequently used data sources are the ones that go into the catalog. Well, that's not going to increase data literacy. What really increases data literacy is having the ability to search across the entire data landscape, understand all the different permutations of the data, understand how the external data factors in. And so that's really an underpinning to drive out this very solid understanding of the data landscape that you have in the organization. Oh, thanks, Jason. Jason Rains thinks I'm a real Texan. Well, I'm not kidding. I am coming to you live from Texas. I don't live in a village that looks like this behind me, but this was actually kind of a similar scene to the movie, so I wanted to be, in line with the movie. But I'm no kidding. I am coming to you live from Texas, and a small town in Texas. So, what is the best way you've seen the ugly lineage problem solved? Again, on lineage, don't try to solve lineage with a manual intervention, right? You have to solve lineage through analytics, and there's two lineage challenges, right? You have forward lineage. So let's say, for example, you go and you get source data from your systems and you put it into a data lake. At that point, when you're in the data lake, the tools and the technologies of the environment of the lake and how you move it forward and share it, that's a very straightforward process for lineage. So how do you rationalize it, what happens, and all that? That's kind of the forward-facing lineage. The difficult lineage is the historic lineage, and that is when you look across the landscape, where did the data come from? How many iterations did it go through before it actually reached the data lake? And that is an area where you have to infer a lot of that because it doesn't exist in documentation. You can't load it in metadata. It doesn't exist in any other mechanism. So again, I've tended to use the Nabu tool to do that because you can capture all of the different data sources and then begin to infer the lineage as opposed to try to manually capture the lineage out of the different systems. Lineage, blah, blah, blah. I talked about this. Oh, it goes back to garbage in to garbage out. Yep, love that. Selling the fun analytics and basic are not addressed. Yep. Yeah, so I think we have spent almost 50 minutes together. I've had a chance to answer a few of your questions. Hopefully you really enjoyed the session. I know everyone would prefer that if we would have been able to do this live at MIT and be able to interact and kind of network after the sessions. I every year find that to be, tremendously valuable, and I thoroughly enjoy it. Given the current situation, though, I really would like to thank Robert Lutton and Elizabeth, Abby, and Gertrude, and Richard Wang, and the entire team that have just worked tirelessly to make this a virtual program. And I think it's so far I've been able to participate in a few sessions, and I think it's gone quite well. So I certainly appreciate your time, your attention, your questions, and please visit the virtual vendor booth, and fill up your passport, not only for the chance to win the prizes, but also to interact with the folks there and ask questions, and really get the most out of the event. So with that, thank you very much, and have a good afternoon.
All right. Thank you so much, Mark. Impressive. You make it look like this job is easy. And if you look at your pedigree as the first chief data officer for Samsung, the R&D chief data officer for GlaxoSmithKline, and of course now what makes you so valuable to the industry is you provide advisory services to global organization in the design and delivery of best-in-class technologies. And you're well suited for that job. Thank you. Outstanding job today.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you very much. Again, thanks for all the hard work. I know between you and the MIT video programming team, I mean, this is not an easy thing to put on. So I really appreciate all the hard work. It made it look easy for me because you folks were doing all the hard part.
Well, and I like how you brought a little fun into it today. The spaghetti Western theme was awesome.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Yep. Cheers.
Right, thanks, folks.